Star Wars Echoes. The Year of Hell. Captain Leia Organa slammed her fist into the control panel. The Millennium Falcon roared in protest. The red flashing lights of the command console flickered and died. "Oh, come on," Leia moaned. A sudden burst of light sent a shower of sparks across the controls. The system reset, and the lights returned to green. She breathed a short sigh of relief. The comms channel buzzed to life. "Captain Organa, this is your final warning. Surrender immediately, or you will be destroyed." She flicked a switch, severing the connection, and took the controls. She threw the Falcon into a deep dive, its systems screaming in opposition. The Falcon fought like a wild animal, ignoring basic commands in favor of stubborn, hardwired subroutines. You didn't fly the Falcon, you negotiated with it. And when all else failed, you wrestled it into submission. Another shower of sparks erupted from the ceiling. The Falcon lurched starboard as its rear portside shields failed. She checked the scanner. 3 TIE fighters lurked, just beyond the range of the quad laser cannons. The scream of their twin ion engines, a constant reminder of their presence. A small volley of green plasma shot past the ship's hull. Leia reached across the vacant co-pilot seat and flicked another switch, diverting power from a secondary system. The shields refreshed, but the Falcon lurched again. "Dank Ferric," she swore, watching the shields fail. She threw her weight across the yoke, sending the Falcon into a dramatic spiral. The navicomputer chirped, a high-pitched, tinny sound that cut through the roar of the failing port stabilizers. Leia didn't wait for confirmation. She slammed the hyperdrive levers forward. The engine stuttered and cut out. A familiar growl sounded over the internal comms. "It's not my fault." Leia pushed herself up from the console, her muscles aching with a deep, vibrating fatigue. It had taken 3 more attempts to coax the Millennium Falcon into the safety of hyperspace. The putrid stench of ozone and scorched wiring hung heavily in the air. The portside shield array was scrap, fried beyond repair. They would have to find a replacement soon, assuming they lived that long. She stepped out of the cockpit and into the main access corridor. The emergency lighting flickered with a rhythmic, sickly pulse, an impromptu wiring fix she'd bypassed weeks ago. A heavy metallic clatter echoed through the hall as Chewbacca descended from the upper gun turret. The Wookiee looked a shadow of his former self, his once lustrous coat, thin and mangy, matted with grease and the stress of a year spent on the run. He hopped down to the deck plating, his breath coming in a low, ragged wheeze. He met her eyes, and for a second, the shared weight of their situation hung in the air between them. Leia placed her hand on the Wookiee's shoulder. She squeezed gently, then turned away toward the main hold. The Spice Runner's crates and borrowed Imperial shipments were long gone, replaced by a grim inventory of a desperate insurgency. Stacks of grit-covered emergency rations, crates of illicit blasters, and piles of discarded, grease-stained flight suits were shoved into every corner. The center of the floor was dominated by a massive, disemboweled power converter, a vital organ that Chewie had been midway through repairing when the TIE fighters attacked. It sat there like a metal carcass, leaking hydraulic fluid onto the deck plating. Leia's gaze lingered on a tangled ruin of gold plating and exposed wiring. The protocol droid sat slumped against the bulkhead, his photoreceptors dark and lifeless, the first casualty of their year of hell. Despite every logical reason to scrap him for parts, she couldn't bring herself to do it. He was her last witness of a better life. The silence of the hold grew heavy, amplified by the distant, rhythmic thrum of the hyperdrive. Leia's knees finally gave out. She collapsed into the cold padding of the couch and buried her face in her hands. The smell of the Falcon, old sweat, cold metal, and stale air closed in around her, and for the first time in a year, she allowed the tears to come. How did the Empire keep finding her? The question was a jagged splinter in her mind. It had been this way since Bespin, the day the galaxy went dark. They had escaped Vader's trap in the clouds, but at a terrifying cost. 3PO, Lando, R2, Luke. Leia squeezed her eyes shut, the memory of that final, desperate moment on Cloud City burning behind her eyelids. He was gone. The boy from the desert, the last spark of the Jedi, had been extinguished before he'd ever had a chance to shine. Since that day, Vader had chased her across the stars with a predatory, personal obsession. She'd been forced to vanish, severing all ties to the Alliance and disappearing into the unknown regions. Her presence was a death sentence to any rebel cell that sheltered her. To stay was to bring a fleet of star destroyers down upon their heads. She tried to take solace in the small victories, the satisfying boom of a TIE fighter exploding, or the sight of a star destroyer's bridge disappearing into the blur of hyperspace. But those victories were becoming fewer and far between. The galaxy was growing smaller, the shadows longer. A soft, mournful warble drifted over the internal comms, the sound vibrating through the metal of the hold. They were in the clear. The Empire hadn't followed them. Leia wiped the sting from her eyes, her expression hardening. "Understood. Thank you, Chewie," she said, her voice raspy. "I'm going to check on our cargo." Leia moved past a stack of heavy crates, her hand tracing the cold bulkhead to guide her way. It was dark. The air was cold. The rhythmic rumble of the hyperdrive felt like a heartbeat. As her eyes adjusted to the gloom, something small shifted the shadows. Han Solo was a shadow of his former self. The cocky space pirate she'd grown to love had become a wretch, huddled in a nest of blankets and old flight jackets, a prisoner in the very ship he had once called his greatest pride. A sharp pang of guilt pierced Leia's chest. The rescue from Jabba the Hutt had been a disaster from the start. In the smoke and fire of the palace's downfall, Leia had been forced to trigger an emergency decanting, a crude, violent thaw of Han's carbonite prison. He hadn't emerged into her arms as a hero. He had collapsed onto the stone floor as a casualty of her desperation. The botched thaw had seared his optic nerves and scrambled his equilibrium. He sat there, staring at a bulkhead he couldn't see, his hands twitching rhythmically as if trying to find a yoke that wasn't there. He was a bird without wings, and every time she looked at him, she saw the price of failure. "Han?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the thrum of the ship. "I used to be," he rasped. The words were a dry rattle, delivered with the flat finality of a death sentence. "Han," Leia repeated, stepping closer. She reached into her utility belt and pulled out a small, pressurized canister. It contained a bright blue fluid. "I found this in the refresher. You haven't been using it." "It's garbage," Han spat. "The colto, the bacta, that herbal junk Chewie finds on the backwater worlds. It's all garbage, Leia. It's like pouring water on a scorched circuit and expecting it to spark. The lights are out. They aren't coming back on." "We don't know that," she countered, her voice rising with a desperate, forced optimism. "There are experimental procedures. I've heard of ocular transplants in the corporate sector, cybernetic grafting that can bypass the hibernation damage." Han let out a harsh, barking laugh that dissolved into a cough. "With the Empire breathing down our necks? With no credits to our name and a ship that's held together by spit and prayer?" He turned his milky eyes toward the sound of her voice, his face twisting. "There is no hope, Leia. There's just this." "Don't you dare," Leia snapped, the princess in her surfacing through the exhaustion. "I didn't crawl through the mud of a dozen worlds and face down Jabba the Hutt just to watch you give up. We are survivors, Han." "Survivors?" Han roared, suddenly scrambling to his feet. He stumbled, his shoulder slamming into a bulkhead, but he pushed off it with a violent energy. "Is that what you call this? Look at me. I'm a ghost, and it's all because of you." He began to flail his arms, his voice cracking with a year's worth of festering bitterness. If I'd never walked into that damned cantina, if I'd just taken my reward and left after Yavin, I'd still have my sight. I'd still have my ship. I'd be halfway across the galaxy with a drink in my hand and a clear sky ahead of me. I was better off before I ever knew you, Princess. His hand closed around a heavy, jagged piece of a broken coupling. With a primal scream of frustration, he hurled it into the darkness. It sailed wide, missing Leia by a meter and slamming into a stack of ration crates with a violent thwack. "Get out!" he screamed, his chest heaving as he collapsed back into his nest of blankets. "Get out and leave me to the dark. It's the only thing I have left." Leia sank into the pilot's seat, the worn leather groaning under her weight. Chewbacca didn't look up immediately. He was hunched over the console, his large, grease-stained fingers working with surprising delicacy on a circuit board. He let out a low, questioning rumble, a soft vibration that Leia felt in her chest more than she heard with her ears. "He's resting," Leia said, the lie tasting like ash. The Wookiee glanced toward her, his dark, soulful eyes lingering on the redness around her own. He didn't press. He simply turned back to his work, his shoulders slumped as he tightened a connection. Leia reached for the navicomputer. The screen flickered, casting a pale, cold blue glow over her face. She checked their route, tracing the jagged vector that led away from the safety of the unknown regions and back toward the fringes of the outer rim. It had taken months of silent back-channeling, half-dead contacts, and the last of her secret Alderaanian accounts to buy this information. It was a location most believed to be a myth, a private stronghold, a place of fire and obsidian that housed the Dark Lord's private sanctuary. They were right on course for Mustafar,